We have finally arrived at this Silver Age of comic books. It's 1956, and DC ushers in the Silver Age and dominates our list. What makes it? What from other companies make it? And what are other companies' top books? We're going to take a look at the CGC Census from 1956, up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, let's like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the description for links to my eBay store, email, whatnot, and Instagram. So we've been doing this list weekly since pre-1935, and we've gone all the way through the Golden Age. Golden Age is done. We're doing it one list every year, every week a different year, and we're moving in order. So now it's 1956. We've hit the Silver Age of comics. See if you can guess what number one is. We're going to look at the top 10. We're going to look at the top 10, other keys, other books from top publishers. And since DC is such a big part of the game, we're also going to take a look at the DC books that continued from the Golden Age into the Silver Age and see where they rank in terms of their popularity. So let's take a look, starting with number 10. And number 10 on the list is Batman number 101. This is a Sheldon Moldoff cover, and this is an interesting book. I have a copy. There's actually a variant of this book, and it's not uncommon for some covers from DC of this era. There's a variant where Batman's cape and gloves, etc., are essentially the same color as the gray in his uniform. But this is one where there's a little more distinction between the gray and the blue, and it's just a still Golden Age Batman book. And this comes onto the census with 114 copies. Moving up to number 9 on the list, and this is our top non-DC book. A little bit of a spoiler here. The top 8 are all DC books. And this is from EC Comics. It's Mad Magazine number 30. And it is the first cover appearance of Alfred E. Newman. First full cover appearance, I suppose. He's been like in the top there. We can see him in this little Why Me Worry kind of oval. But this is the first full appearance of Alfred E. Newman on the cover. And this is a... doesn't say who did the cover. And again, this is a magazine. At this point in time, Mad had transitioned from a comic, I think the first 23 issues, to a full-size magazine. You can see it's a magazine slab. And this does have a census count of 124. Now, in terms of magazines, if you look at the CGC data... I get all my information from cgcdata.com. There are magazines. We're only interested in the comic books. I will mention magazines. I have in the past when they break into the top 10. And at this point, there were some Playboys that did. There probably, some other Playboys that have been slabbed over the years because of the popularity of the models. The first one with Marilyn Monroe had a very high census count, and now it's usually Sports Illustrated, other sports-related magazines that have covers of popular athletes like Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or Hank Aaron, whomever, at this point in time. Let's go back to DC for number 8 on our list, and it is Batman number 97, the second appearance of Ace the Bat Hound. Here on the cover by Win Mortimer. And again, this is still Golden Age, right? We're going to talk about the distinction between that in just a couple of minutes, between when it's gold and when it's silver. And that comes into play for a few books on this list. So this particular Batman issue, there are more of them available than there were earlier issues. Still highly collectible. People who like to collect the first 100 issues of Batman, but they're going to be only submitted in a little bit better condition, right? You're not going to submit a 2.0 of this book. It just doesn't make sense. But if you have like a 7, it probably makes sense. Let's go to number 7 on the list, and that is Showcase number 1. This is the first appearance of Fireman Farrell. I think he only had one other appearance, and that was in Showcase 100 in one panel, which put together all of the characters that had been in the the all the issues of Showcase that they had started. So the first few issues of Showcase, they were starting out different kind of adventure type stories, Frogmen and the Firefighters, and I forget what the third one was, but it was, like more generic adventure strips before they decided to go in a different direction. So this particular book does have John Prentice cover, and it has a census count because it's number 1, and there are people who do like to collect all the showcases, which is challenging because there's some huge keys in there. This number 1 has 130 copies on the census. If we go to now, we have a tie for number 5, and one of them is Batman 104. This is the last Batman issue of 1956, so this is a Silver Age book. We do find out that Alfred's middle name is Thaddeus Crane, but I think this does have a really awesome Sheldon Moldoff cover with the kind of the sci-fi era Batman where he's underwater battling this kind of dragonish character. The Batman stories at this time were still were pretty hokey, and each issue pretty much contained 3 smaller 6 to 8 page self-contained stories. There wasn't like one overarching story throughout the whole book. And they were kind of introducing a little bit of new continuity, but like we saw the second appearance of Ace the Bat Hound, but there wasn't continuing. The stories weren't running throughout, and we'd see that a little bit later. This particular one has 139 copies on the census, which ties it with its predecessor, Batman 103, which has a Sheldon Moldoff circus cover. The circus covers. This also has a Bat Hound appearance, but both of them, 104 and 103, both have census counts of 139. Now, number 4 on the list is also a Batman book, but it's from Detective Comics, which is a little bit unusual, but it is a key first appearance. It's Detective Comics 230, the first appearance of the Mad Hatter, who has been a Batman villain continuing. He did. Now, this is kind of what's interesting. So this does have a Win Mortimer cover with Mad Hatter featured on the cover, and this particular story was sort of adapted for the Batman TV series, where David Wayne played Mad Hatter. I think he had 2 episode appearances. But in one of them, he does want Batman's cowl for his collection. Now, in the Batman TV series, he wants it because he wants the hats of everybody that sent him to prison. So he wants to get the 12 jurors who all have hats. But you can see here, now I can add Batman's cowl to my collection of hats. Once he sees my face, that's the end of my career. Pretty much the same story in the TV series. So, and the Mad Hatter was kind of prominent villain in the Batman animated series. So this comes in with a census count of 148. We stay with Detective Comics for our number 3 book, and that's Detective Comics 233, which is the first appearance of Batwoman, Kathy Kane. And it does have a Sheldon Moldoff cover. She's on the cover. And Batwoman was kind of a response to the Comics Code Authority and Wortham's seduction of the innocent. In that book, he said that they implied a homosexual relationship between Batman and Robin. And there was one panel in one specific book where, like, they both wake up in the same bedroom and they'd see the bat signal out the window. So Batwoman was introduced when the Comics Code Authority came into place to kind of be a romantic interest of Batman, to show that Batman was a heterosexual. And she continued in the adventures. There were like stories of the future where they had kids, and she kind of became a Lois Lane in superhero guise to his, Lois to Superman, Batwoman to Batman. And she was kind of brushed aside when the New Look era Batman came in with Carmine Infantino, where they updated him to in the mid-'60s. And so she did have some appearances in the late 70s, and then the character was reinvented about 15 years ago. But this is the first appearance of the Kathy Kane version of Batwoman, and this does have a census count of 292. let's go to number 2 on the list. And number 2 on the list is Batman number 100, an anniversary issue. Just like Superman number 100 was number 1 on the list for 1955, Batman 100 makes the list. And they do have the cover denoting that it is an anniversary issue with covers of Batman number 1 and other classic covers from earlier in the run. And again, we're right at the end of the Golden Age. And this is... it's an anniversary issue. I think that is a little bit more collectible. And this book has a census count of 377. Now let's go to number 1 on the list, which should be a surprise to absolutely no one that knows anything about comics in 1956 and the beginning of the Silver Age. Our number 1 book on the list is none other than Showcase number 4, the first appearance of Barry Allen Flash. And it is the book that most people consider the beginning of the Silver Age. Now, you have a Carmine Infantino cover. Infantino, of course, did the artwork with Robert Kanigher and John Broome stories. And this is it. This is what started it all. And DC, after 3 issues of kind of, as I said earlier, adventure characters in Showcase, they jumped in and decided to reboot the superheroes. Julie Schwartz was the editor who said, okay, let's take some of the characters that we have in our stable that we, I guess, essentially have the trademarks for and re-envision them for the 50s. And each of the characters that were kind of reinvented had more of a science fiction bent than just a... in the Golden Age, when new heroes were created, there was sometimes a science fiction aspect to their origins. Sometimes it was supernatural. Sometimes it was fantastical. Sometimes it just wasn't explained at all. You know, the original Jay Garrick inhaled hard water fumes and then became super fast. It was just a carrier to create a superhero. But here we have a brand new character, and Carmine Infantino was at the height of his powers in terms of his artwork. We talked earlier about some of his work on some of the sci-fi stories and Captain Comet and Detective Chimp, but this is really his breakthrough, and it defined comics for a generation. Now, Flash wouldn't appear in the next issue of Showcase. It was sort of like a tryout book, and DC was looking to see what would stick. Remember, comic books at this point in time didn't really, they were kind of in search of an identity, right? What was going to be popular with collectors? And they, DC, of course, already had superheroes in play. The Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc. Kings of the Wild, that was Showcase number 2. And then Showcase number 5 would be Manhunters. And by the time we talk about issue number 6, we're really leaning into that. It's 1957, and that I'm sure will be on our list next year. Flash would appear again in Showcase number 8, 4 issues later, which was cover dated June of 1957. So we'd have to wait a little bit for another Flash adventure, but he eventually got a few stories and then eventually got his own comic book, and that ran until issue 350 and was a solid part of the DC continuity. I don't know what more can be said about Showcase number 4. It's the most expensive book from the year. And it's, I think, certainly the most important book from 1956. Now, we don't see a whole lot of follow-up as the beginning of Silver Age. Like, what is the next book? What comes next in the Silver Age? We'll have to see a little bit more in 1957. And the elements weren't always straight to superheroes. There are still adventure story elements to some of these new creations. So let's take a look at books outside the top 10 that are important, or are the top books from their particular publishers. Now, we had 1 EC book and 9 DC books in the top 10. And I don't research the other years ahead of time, so I haven't like done the 1957 research yet. I'll do it when I'm done with this video. I would dare say through 1960, DC's going to dominate the list. There'll be a couple of books probably pop in here and there into the top 10, but I would imagine that most of them are going to be DC books. And then in 1961, we'll see a shift as Marvel starts, and then Marvel's probably going to take over the list. But let's take a look at some other books that made the that are important books. At number 16 is, oh, by the way, going back to Showcase 4, there are 451 copies on the Census. There are additionally 160 restored copies. Now, when I do these numbers, I only look at CGC blue labels. And what's interesting, the 450, that's not the top book so far on the list. We have to go back to 1952, where 4-color 386, Uncle Scrooge 1 essentially, and Mad 1 both have over 600 copies on the Census. Flash, at this point in time, would rank as the number 3 book. I'm pretty sure, yes. The Showcase 4 ranks as the number 3 book. So there are more copies than other books from the 50s, but not a lot. And that's one thing that's we're really going to see separate. Think about this number. There's 451, and then 5 years later, how many copies of Fantastic Four number 1 are on the Census? And I know that it's a lot more than 451. Let's go to number 16 on the list, and this is another DC book. It's House of Secrets number 1, Ruben Moriera cover. This was a sci-fi book, and it would last for 80 issues until 1966. Would also feature, Eclipso and Prince Rahman later in the story. And then in 1969, it was brought back as a horror comic and lasted until 1978 with issue 154. And, of course, 92 is the first appearance of Swamp Thing. But this is where the book got the start, and there are 95 copies on the Census. The second best book from EC is the last color comic published by EC. Mad was a magazine, and I think the interiors of Mad were always black and white, including in the 70s when I was a kid. But this is Incredible Science Fiction number 33 with a classic science fiction Wally Wood cover. And again, EC floundered. Other than Mad, they floundered in terms of trying to get a foothold in comic books after the code came into play. They were still able to get their science fiction titles out because they didn't go against the code, but I think the momentum was gone, and so was EC. This book is number 19 with 82 copies on the Census. Talked about the top DC books from each year. This is Superboy's top book. It's Superboy number 49, and it is the first appearance of Metallo, a Kurt Swan and Stan K cover. This is a different Metallo than we would see in Action Comics 252, which was the villain. Superboy's marooned on another planet, an island in space. I don't know what this is about. It's Metallo of Krypton, so it's kind of Metallo in name only. But this particular book has 79 copies on the Census, which ties it with Superman number 104, which has a Wayne Boring and Stan K cover. And it's just a Golden Age Superman book. This is March, right? The Flash, Showcase 4, has a cover date. I believe it's October. Yeah, October cover date. So anything prior to that, certainly prior to September, is in many quarters still considered Golden Age, and we'll consider this Superman 104 as Golden Age. Classic yellow cover, sci-fi cover. Actually, I have a copy of this book, not graded. There are also 79 copies on the Census. Let's talk about some other publishers, popular publishers. We're going to go to Archie Comics. Their top book in terms of CGC submissions for 1956 is Little Archie number 1 by Bob Bowling. Drawing the cover. This is Archie as kids. This would become a popular trope with other kind of cartoony properties, like Muppet Babies and those sorts of things. But here we have Archie giving flowers to Veronica, and Betty is upset by that. And for some reason, Archie's shorts match his hair. Anyway, Archie number 1s are going to be popular among Archie collectors, and this particular book, this title ran in different iterations. They slightly would change the title a little bit, but it ran for 180 issues all the way till 1983. 78 copies on the census. The top book from Atlas, which is the bridge between Timely and Marvel, is Yellow Claw #1, which has a Joe Maneely cover. We talked extensively about Joe Maneely in a previous episode. Sadly passed away far too young, but was an amazing artist and a favorite of Stan Lee. And I posited what would have happened if Maneely had still been around during the Marvel Age of Comics, but we'll never know. This also is the first appearance of the Yellow Claw, but it's also the first appearance of Jimmy Woo. This book ran for 4 issues. This was when Marvel, they also had the Black Knight going on. They were trying to find their foothold in terms of what would be popular. Didn't quite work out, but folks like to collect all 4 issues of this. And Jimmy Woo, of course, is the character played by Randall Park in the Ant-Man movies and WandaVision, etc. And he's been in the comics. He came back in the late 60s and then has been a member of the Agents of Atlas. So is a fairly important character, and this is his first appearance. This also has 78 copies on the census. Another DC book, and this is a key. Actually, DC just reprinted this book recently. This is Adventure Comics 229. It's the first appearance of Topo, the Aquaman's kind of octopus buddy. It's also considered, because it came out in October 1956, the first Silver Age appearance of Aquaman and the first Silver Age appearance of Green Arrow and Speedy. That's really rather arbitrary. It's not as though anything in the narrative changed from Adventure Comics 228 to 229. It's just, this is when the Silver Age started, October 1956, and Aquaman and Green Arrow have been published continuously since 1941. So this is when the Silver Age occurred. So again, not a whole lot of change in narrative. Superboy was still the headliner in Adventure Comics, but this is kind of the one that collectors point to, and DC has kind of pointed them to it, and it has 70 copies on the census. Now, the next book doesn't have the Comics Code Authority stamp, and we talked about that in the last issue. This is from Dell Comics. It's Uncle Scrooge #14. This is Carl Barks' story and art and cover. Because the Disney books that Dell published, and that was the majority of their publishing, they also did 4-color, which had like movie adaptations and such, and other titles. It was considered wholesome enough that they didn't need the Comics Code Authority stamp. But Carl Barks, always going to be popular, and this is the top Dell book, 34th on our list, 66 copies on the census. Talked about the top books of each of the DC titles. The top book from Action Comics is number 222 with an Al Plastino cover. One of these Superman, Clark Kent, dual identity covers. I also like this, very much of its time. There are a lot of these covers where you get the details and the entry blank for a giant 5,000 prize contest. I don't know what the winners got, but probably it wasn't worth clipping whatever they needed to clip out of the comic book. So Action Comics, the top Action Comics book for this year, 51 copies on the census. Another DC book that went all the way from gold through silver into bronze and just short of copper, I guess, is World's Finest Comics. And this is issue number 84 with a Dick Sprang cover. We're already in the era where Superman and Batman were regularly teaming up issue to issue. Superman's missing. Lois needs Batman and Robin's help. I don't think this has any other key significance. It just so turns out that this is the one that have been submitted most, and there are 49 copies on the census. Now, notice, other than Dell, EC, Archie, and Atlas, it's all DC. This is how dominant they were at the time, including the next book on the census, which is 74th on the list. It's Sugar and Spike #1 with a Sheldon Mayer cover. This is a humor title that lasted for 98 issues all the way up to 1971. Now, #1, and again, this is a kid's book. It's a humor book, so it is a little not as well cared for. But since it's a #1 issue, it's very sought after by collectors, and it does have a census count of 39. Our next book on the list, another DC book. This is the top Wonder Woman book from the year, and it is Wonder Woman #85 with an Irv Novick cover. Wonder Woman's trapped in a bottle by some sort of giant, but it's tied with Wonder Woman #86, Also with a Novik cover where this guy is painting Wonder Woman and he discovers that she looks like Diana Prince. I think Wonder Woman has been gaining popularity amongst collectors, and I think it's because, yeah, she survived from the Golden Age. So you can kind of jump in and get books from the 50s and 60s that not a lot of people have kind of gone after like they have with Superman and Batman. Both of these books have 33 copies on the Census. Up next is the top book from Harvey Publications. And remember, Harvey had some of the most gruesome, grotesque pre-code horror covers. But post-code, their top book from 1956 is Baby Huey, the Baby Giant #1. I was talking to somebody like, who's Baby Huey? Well, Baby Huey is like a giant duck in a diaper. I don't know. Anyway, the Baby Huey book ran for 88 issues up until 1972, and then there were another 3 issues in the 80s. Harvey Comics, Casper, Wendy, they were popular among kids, and there were a lot of them published. I think Richie Rich as well. So we're going to see some of these #1 issues crop up, and this particular book has 28 on the Census. Our next book is Blackhawk #100 with a Dick Dillon and Chuck Codiera cover. Quality Comics, their top book for the year, and this was it for Quality. End of 1956, they're sold off to DC. Blackhawk continues, and this is issue 100. It ran through issue 107 for Quality, and then issue 108 in January of 1957 is a DC comic. It ran for a total, going back to World War II era, it ran for a total of 250 issues continuously, all the way until 1977. DC canceled the title and then brought it back for an additional 23 issues in the early 1980s. But Blackhawk was one of those titles that did survive when Quality took over, along with GI Combat. I think Heartthrobs was the other one. And I think Robin Hood lasted a couple of issues. But the this one, again, much like the Batman #100, 100 issues people collect. And that makes this a popular book. And there are 21 copies on the Census. Our next book is Girls in Love #57. This is also a Quality Comics book. This is the last issue. And this was not one of the books that carried over. I think Heartthrobs, right? That was the one book from Quality that did carry over. This is the last issue. It is December 1956. So this is the last month of Quality Comics, right? January 57, those handful of titles continue with DC. But what makes this important is it's a Matt Baker cover, and also interior art by Matt Baker. His career was kind of winding down at this point. He did pass away far too young in 1959. But I think that this cover, to me, doesn't look as detailed as some of his work from more recent years, from 1953, 54, 55. For other publishers, too. And I don't know if that was a different inker on the cover or what it was, but it's still a Matt Baker book. It's one of the more affordable Matt Baker books, to be honest. And I don't know if that's maybe Quality. There are a few more of them out there. There are 57 on the Census, which is a fairly large number for a Matt Baker romance book, so that supply and demand might come into play. This might be more of an entry-level book for Baker collectors. But, yep, that's Girls in Love #57, the final issue in the series in the final month of Quality Comics. Now, another publisher that would gain momentum in the 1960s is Charlton Publications. We've seen them for a few years. And they have 2 books that are tied for the next spot in the Census. It's Mysteries of Unexplored Worlds #1, where you kind of have this sleeping giant, and these folks think they're in a cave, but they're in his armpit. You think, oh, man, how does that smell? Anyway, this Mysteries of Unexplored Worlds lasted for 48 issues up until 1965, and it's tied on the Census with Out of This World #1, which has more of a sci-fi aspect to it. You have this rocket taking off, and you have these kind of lizard dinosaur creatures on some strange planet listening in with a ham radio. This ran for 16 issues through 1959, and the two books, both Charlton books, have a total of 14 copies on the Census. Up next is another quality book, and this is the last issue of Plastic Man, issue number 64, with a Chuck Cudera cover. Again, we see a sci-fi aspect to it, different than what his creator, Jack Cole, had envisioned for the character. But it was interesting that Plastic Man didn't make the transfer over to DC Comics. We did get a Plastic Man series in the Silver Age. It was canceled and continued in the Bronze Age. Plastic Man had his own cartoon series in the 80s, and he's been around DC Comics ever since. We're just waiting for a live-action adaptation of him. A very strange character because of like the comedic aspect, and I don't think it's easy to fit him into other superheroes' narrative always. But anyway, this final issue of Plastic Man, and this is from November of 1956, has a census count of 13. Up next on our list this is an interesting one. This is from Catechetical Guild. And this is God's Heroes in America, which doesn't have any number. And there's 25-cent versions, and there's one with a 35-cent sticker on it. But this is a series of stories about Catechetical Guild was a Catholic publishing group that put out these comic books about religious heroes, so to speak. These were true stories about individuals in the Americas that were part of the history of North America, Canada, Mexico, as well as the United States. I actually did read this book on comicbookplus.com, where books that are in the public domain have been scanned and are up there and very easy to access. I might, once I do this series, I might do a deep dive into some other kind of curio books from the Gold and Silver Age. But at any rate, Catechetical Guild, they had done some of the, these warnings against communism and that sort of thing. And they did have a book that I've come across a couple times, Treasure Chest, that lasted until 1972, but very much a niche publication. But there are 13 copies of this on the Census. Our next book is another quality book, and I put it on here because it is a Matt Baker cover, and it's also the last issue of Love Secrets, issue number 56, also from December of 1956. And again, to me, the Matt Baker artwork on the cover isn't as the line work isn't as fine, it isn't as detailed, and it doesn't have the warmth that his other work does. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. But again, final issue. Quality, December 1956. We're seeing a pattern kind of here. 11 copies on the Census. The top book from Pines is Dennis the Menace number 18 with a Hank Ketchum cover. Talking about Dennis the Menace before, humorous kid character, always getting to shenanigans. This has 8 copies on the Census. Another publisher, the top book from Standard, and again, now we're into single-digit counts on the Census. So these publishers, there aren't a lot of them out there, and they're not really collectible enough or valuable enough to be submitted in large scale to CGC. And by large scale, I mean like a couple of dozen copies of them. At any rate, this is the Standard. It's Dennis the Menace number 17. They switched from Standard to Pines between issues 17 and 18. It's another Dennis the Menace book. That is tied with the top book from Superior Comics, which is My Secret Marriage number 20. Just another romance book, and this has 7 copies on the Census. The next book is the top book from Gilberton. It's Gilberton. It's Classics Illustrated. This is issue number 133, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, with this painted cover. This was, 5 years before the film version of The Time Machine came out? But the sci-fi issues, or the horror issues like Frankenstein, of Classics Illustrated are the ones that are much more sought after by collectors, rather than just like some gothic romance or something, unless Matt Baker did the cover. But this one has 6 copies on the Census, and that ties it with the top book from ACG, which is Adventures into the Unknown, number 79, which also has 6 copies on the Census. Adventures into the Unknown did have pre-code horror. They kind of transitioned into this sci-fi kind of yeah, quasi horror genre, and they did last. They did pick up some superheroes for years. Again, this has 6 copies on the Census. Up next is Mysterious Stories number 7, the top book from Premiere. This also has a little bit of a horror with the Pipes of Pan going on. Very much a smaller publisher with only 4 copies on the Census. That's going to tie it with G.I. Joe number 48, the top book from Ziff Davis. Some of the more popular G.I. Joes from earlier years had painted covers and women in distress. Ziff Davis lasted for 1 more year publishing comic books, but they're still around today. They've published usually more like technical magazines like Popular Electronics and PC Magazine. They did have kind of a foray back into comics with some PC related stuff that's not really popular in like the 90s or something. But Ziff Davis is still around, but only really 1 more year where they'd be publishing comic books, and their flagship title was G.I. Joe. The next book on the list is the top from Avon, and that is Jesse James number 25, a Western. It would last till issue 29, and we could see that these things are really winding down. There's not a lot remaining. The top book, there's a tie for the top books from Magazine Enterprises. Magazine Enterprises published comics from 1943 to 1959. Their most well-remembered comic is the Golden Age Ghost Rider, which eventually Marvel, I don't know if they bought the rights or just took the rights. I don't know if it went into public domain, but they have 2 books that are tied for their top spot on the Census. One is Red Mask number 52, and the other is Straight Arrow number 55, both with 4 copies on the Census. And the final publisher that I was able to find really anything more than a couple copies of is Ace Periodicals. Their top book is Penalty number 48. True stories of police cases, not as sensational as the true crime comics of the late 40s and early 50s, but there are just 3 copies of this on the Census. So that's going to finish it up for 1956, the beginning of the Silver Age, and really at this point in time, dominance by DC. And you may have noticed a much shorter video this week because there are far fewer publishers that were publishing comic books at this point in time. All those publishers that were jumping on the pre-code horror bandwagon have left the field. And, DC is dominating the market. I also think at the time, Dell and probably Harvey as well, and Archie, were doing well in terms of sales, but those books aren't quite as collectible as the DC superheroes that are still an enormous part of the pop culture zeitgeist today. The Archie characters are to a lesser extent, but we'll see how it changes as we move later into the 1950s. Next up is 1957. I'm not sure what's going to pop into the top spot. It's going to be interesting. Will it be another Flash showcase book? Or will it be something else? Who knows? I'm not even sure exactly. There were a bunch of first appearances from DC in the late 1950s. But we'll see what is next when you tune in next week. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.